That's a good chai tea. Now, I know not everybody drinks tea or coffee. You might want to drink a steamed milk, but whatever your flavor is, whatever your thing is, it's always good to sit down and have a cup of tea or coffee or steamed milk just to kind of be casual about stuff. So anyways, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about sensitivity. You know, feelings matter. Our feelings matter. The way we treat one another matters. And if we're not nice to each other, if we don't speak well to each other, we may think that little insult or that little jab just lasts for a minute or two, but the person who goes away from that feeling may think about it all day long. They may go to bed thinking about that little insult, that little joke, that little tease that you shared with them. So I want you to know that I think sensitivity in interfaith dialogue, as we build conversations with people who think differently about God, is so very important. Let me tell you a quick story. I was once with my co-author, Bob Millett, in the great city of Boston, Massachusetts, and we had arrived just after about 6 months from him having a heart attack, a pretty massive heart attack. So this was his first trip, and we were doing pretty well. We had a few appointments, we had some opportunities to engage with some folks. It was really a good trip. But later that night, I could tell Bob wasn't feeling so good, so I left him alone and kind of went on my own out for dinner and stuff like that. Well, later that evening, he calls me to his room, and I get out of my room and I go down to his room and I say, "Bob, you look terrible." When he opened the door, he literally was sweating profusely. He was in his sweats and his t-shirt, and he just felt and looked terrible, very clammy. I said, "Bob, are you feeling okay?" He looked at me and said, "Greg, I don't feel so good. My heart is really hurting. I'm not sure what to do, but I don't want to call anybody because I want to get on that airplane tomorrow and fly back to Utah and be with my wife, and then I'll get things figured out there." And I said, No, Bob. Because I care about your wife and your family, we're going to check into it tonight because I think you may be having another heart attack." So he resisted, but I insisted, and we got him down to the medical center, and they looked into it, and of course he was having a minor heart attack. It was a pretty serious evening. It was funny though, because later that night in the early morning hours, as we're kind of dealing with the aftermath of this attack and how he's now being treated by the physicians and doctors, I said, "Bob, you know, we're new in our friendship and we've never had the chance to talk about this, but I was wondering if I could pray for you. I know I'm a mere Baptist and I don't have any priesthood of power or anything, but out of just concern for you, I'd like to offer you a prayer." And very tenderly, Bob said, "You know, that would be great. It would be wonderful if you just prayed for me." So I prayed for him. It was nothing fancy, nothing too dramatic. I just prayed for him and asked God to heal my friend and to be with him. Well, later, about maybe 15, 20 minutes later, he said, "You know, Greg, you got me thinking. And it was very nice of you to offer a prayer for me, but I was wondering if you could call the priesthood brethren to come and anoint me with oil because this is a pretty serious matter." I said, "Bob, I know that my lowly Baptist prayer does not cut weight with you. It was just a joke. But I said, honestly, I'd be thrilled to call your friends." And of course, in the early morning hours, they came down. They did what they did as a formal blessing to him, and they prayed for him. And then they left, but I just kind of kept hanging out with Bob and being with my friend. Throughout the course of that night, I really believe God did something very special in our friendship because it was just kind of going through a great big trial. Well, by the morning time, he was feeling better, but he had been told by his doctors that he needed to stick around Boston for a few more days, and his wife was going to come out and be with him. And so he insisted that I go to a church service at the Park Street Church, a service that he and I were going to go together. And this is where the whole spiritual sensitivity thing really kicks in. Because as I arrived at the Park Street Church by myself, without Bob, the thing was packed. The church is a very historic church, a very famous church. It was packed to the gills. And the usher directed me to a particular seat in the church. And as I went down the aisle in the row there, I couldn't believe it. Who was standing next to me but a friend of mine from Utah, a Delta airline pilot. His name was Ron. And Ron is a very charismatic Christian. He is very zealous in his charismatic understanding of things. And so as I stood there, he says, "No way, what are you doing here?" And I shared with him a little bit about the fact that I was there with my friend Bob Millett, a Latter-day Saint scholar, and he had had a heart attack 6 months ago, and last night he had a minor heart attack, and it was kind of serious. And man, Ron looked at me and he knew in a moment, I am supposed to pray for Robert Millett. This is no accident. This is why you and I are sitting next to each other at the Park Street Church here in Boston, Massachusetts. This is a calling from the Lord and I must go pray with him. And I said, now wait a minute, Ron. Bob is a Latter-day Saint. You're a very charismatic Christian. I would be very weary of letting you go pray for him. One, you don't even know him. And two, you're a little bit hardcore. But he would not be denied. He was insisting. We barely made it through the church service, but by the end of the church service, he was ready to go. And I said, no, seriously, Ron, I can't let you go pray for Bob because I know you're going to make Bob uncomfortable. And that's the last thing we want to happen to Bob during the time that he's recovering and recuperating in his hospital bed. So anyways, Ron insisted. And I said, I will only do it on 2 guarantees from you. One, that I go into his room first and ask permission. And if he lets you pray for him, then great. But if not, then you can't pray for him. And the second condition is that you are very brief and you're very quick and you just do it and, you don't take too much time and put too much stress on Bob. He assured me that he would do that. We went over to the hospital. We walked in. I said, now you stay here, Ron. I walked into the room with Bob. Bob, are you okay if this happens? He's a bit charismatic. He's a dear brother. He's a sweet man, but he's a little hardcore. And Bob said, that's very sweet of him. Yes, sure. Please let him come in and pray for me. So Ron came in under the guarantee that he would be brief and sensitive. But my brother's passion for prayer kind of took over. And as he began to talk with Bob and talk to him about the importance of prayer, he started to introduce the idea of confessing his sins. And I'm standing at the end of the bed there kind of wondering how far this is going to go. And as he continues to talk and continues to kind of put Bob in this awkward position, I'm feeling more and more uncomfortable for Bob and a little bit more and more frustrated at Ron for doing this religious thing with my friend Bob, who's not from that background. Well, he continued, and I didn't know how far this was going to go. Finally, the phone rang, and it was Bob's wife, Shauna, back in Utah, basically giving him a break. He said, excuse me, picked up the phone, talked to his wife for a few minutes, put it back down, and lo and behold, Ron was right back with talking about generational sins and people in his family who might have smoking cigarettes or drank alcohol or maybe in some way had heart attacks in the past. And he was not going to let Bob out of this particular way of praying for him. And as he continued, I think 20, maybe 25 minutes, I finally said to Ron, we got to call it. At this point, I think you've prayed enough for Bob. I think Bob's prayed and he's done everything you asked him to do. Let's wrap this up. Again, I was pretty frustrated with Ron. Meanwhile, Bob, I could just tell, was getting more and more awkward about the whole thing from the beginning to the end of it. And finally, I got Ron out of the room, said goodbye to him, and off he went to fly an airplane for Delta Airlines. But I walked back in the room and I said, Bob, I am so sorry. I told you he was very passionate. I told you he's very charismatic. I knew that he really had a burden to pray for you, and he really believes that he could help you through his prayers and his efforts there. But as much as I believe Ron was sincere and meant the very best for my friend Robert Millett, I kind of think he wasn't very sensitive. That's the whole key to this dialogue thing. Not only do we have to establish common ground, but we have to understand that somebody else's tradition may be very different than our own. So at the beginning of this thing, I talked about a chai tea or a coffee or a steamed milk. My Latter-day Saint friends don't drink coffee, they don't drink tea. I get that. But they might go to a coffee shop and have a cup of steamed milk with a flavor in it. That's totally great. Or hot chocolate, that's totally fine. And we just need to be sensitive to one another. It's okay that we're different in the way we do things. The day that Ron prayed for Bob, he put Bob in a very awkward situation. Again, he meant well, he was sincere, but I just think it kind of stepped out of the bounds of sensitivity. Well, the funniest part about the whole story, Ron had left, I had left. Bob would later tell me that the man who was in the same hospital room as he was, separated by a curtain, he had discovered the night before was an atheist. And one of the reasons that he was an atheist is because that religious people were weird. So as soon as I had left the room and as soon as Ron had left the room and Bob was laying there, this atheist gentleman right next to my friend Robert Millett pulled the curtain back and he said, you can see why I'm an atheist. That was weird. And for many, many years, Bob and I have laughed in good spirit, not laughed at Ron, but laughed at that whole experience because it really teaches the important principle that we need to be sensitive to one another and that we can't put each other into any boxes. So the next time you're having a religious conversation with somebody, be sensitive, respect their traditions. Maybe they will not always respect yours. Be okay with that. Be sensitive about the fact that they may not know your traditions, but do your best to offer respect and sensitivity to those you're talking with. And it will help you have a better conversation, and it'll help you enjoy your coffee, your tea, or your steamed milk. Thanks for watching.